Riley Lawson had no idea that saying yes to a casual rooftop social would change the entire course of her life. "I feel underdressed," she muttered to herself, tugging at the hem of her navy blue dress as the elevator doors opened onto the rooftop of the Monroe building. "Don't worry, you look amazing," her best friend Kayla whispered beside her, looping her arm through Riley's. The rooftop was glowing string lights arched from steel beams, casting a warm haze over the crowd. Laughter floated through the air, a soft jazz band played in the corner, and the smell of rosemary and roasted garlic wafted from the catered buffet. Everyone looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. Riley felt like an imposter. She didn't even know whose party this was. Kayla had dragged her here last minute, saying something about networking, and just say yes for once. Riley was a junior architect at a mid-level design firm, and her idea of a wild Friday night was ordering Chinese and sketching floor plans on her couch. She didn't do rooftop parties with mysterious hosts. "I'm getting a drink," Kayla said. "Don't hide in a corner." Riley wandered to the edge of the deck, pretending to admire the skyline even though all she could think about was how long she had to stay before it was polite to leave. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders and exhaled. "Beautiful view, huh?" a voice said beside her. She turned and nearly choked on air. The man standing next to her looked straight out of a luxury cologne ad. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair a little tousled by the wind. His suit fit like it was tailored just for him. It probably was. "Yeah," she said, blinking. "It's stunning." "I wasn't talking about the skyline," he said casually, then looked at her with a small smile. "I'm Theo," Riley blinked again, who said things like that and actually made it sound smooth. "Riley," she said slowly. "Are you part of the planning committee?" His eyes flicked with amusement. "Something like that." They stood there for a moment, the sounds of the party fading behind them. Theo had this calm confidence about him, like nothing could shake him. But he wasn't arrogant, it was something else. He looked at her like she was the only person up here. "You don't come to many of these, do you?" he asked. "That obvious? You're not pretending to be interested in NFTs, so yeah," she laughed, and it surprised her. "I'm an architect. My social life is mostly blueprints and old buildings." "Then you build beautiful things," he said. She turned slightly to face him. "And what do you do?" He hesitated, just for a split second. "Let's just say I sign a lot of papers and drink too much black coffee." "That sounds suspiciously like a CEO answer," she joked. He gave her a mysterious look but didn't confirm it. Eventually, Kayla appeared again, dragging her toward the bar, but not before Riley glanced back. Theo was still there, watching her, a faint smile on his lips. The next morning, Riley stood in her tiny kitchen, pouring coffee and trying to shake the strange feeling in her chest. Theo, it wasn't just that he was good-looking. It was the way he listened. The way he looked at her like he saw something past the surface. She didn't even have his last name. 3 days later, her firm was hired to redesign a corporate lobby. A big deal. Riley flipped through the project brief and froze. Client, Carrington Holdings, CEO, Theodore Carrington. Her coffee nearly slipped from her hand. Carrington Holdings was one of the most powerful private companies in the country. Real estate, tech, finance. She'd read about them, and their CEO, that was Theo. Riley had never been more nervous walking into a meeting than she was that Wednesday morning. She wore her nicest blazer, hair pulled back, and tried to look like someone who belonged in a boardroom. The conference room was sleek, glass walls, a long marble table, and a skyline view that made her breath catch. But nothing made her stomach twist like seeing Theo walk in, wearing a fitted gray suit, talking to a group of executives like he owned the world because he did. His eyes landed on her. He stopped mid-sentence. "Riley," he said, surprised, and a flicker of something warm passed through his face. "Mr. Carrington," she said, forcing a professional tone. He tilted his head slightly, amused. "Didn't realize you were with the firm. Didn't realize you were the firm." The room chuckled politely, but his gaze stayed locked on hers. The meeting went on, but Riley felt his eyes on her every time she spoke. When it ended, she tried to make a quick exit, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Riley, can I talk to you for a second?" She turned. "Of course." He waited until the others had cleared out, then he stepped closer, his expression softer now. "Why didn't you tell me you worked in architecture?" he asked. "Why didn't you tell me you were a billionaire CEO?" He laughed. "Fair." They stood in silence for a moment. "I wasn't trying to play games," he said. "I just like talking to you without all the titles." Her heart thudded. "I still do," he added. "Can I take you to dinner?" She should have said no. It was too soon, too complicated, but instead she said, "When?" He smiled. "Tonight." Dinner was at a quiet Italian place that didn't even have a sign, tucked behind a wrought iron gate in the West Village. Theo pulled out her chair, ordered a bottle of wine without looking at a menu, and asked her questions like he genuinely wanted to know everything about her. By the time the tiramisu came, she was laughing so hard her cheeks hurt. "I don't usually do this," she said, stirring her coffee. "Neither do I," he said quietly. "But I haven't stopped thinking about you since that night." Her breath caught, he reached for her hand. "Let me be clear about something. I know this is complicated, but I want to see where this could go." His touch was warm, steady. Her heart had completely betrayed her by racing out of control. "Me too," she whispered. Theo leaned in, brushing his lips over the back of her hand. "Good. Because I'm not going to pretend I don't want you in my life." And just like that, Riley Lawson, who never went to fancy parties, never trusted men in suits, never did impulsive things, found herself falling for the CEO who looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. The black SUV pulled up in front of her building the next evening, its windows tinted and paint gleaming under the streetlights. Riley hesitated at the curb, clutching her coat tighter. She hadn't expected a car service. She'd pictured meeting Theo at the restaurant, maybe walking together. This felt formal. The driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and said her name with a slight nod. She ducked inside, heart thudding, and found a single white rose waiting on the leather seat beside her. No note, just the flower and the faint scent of cedar lingering in the cabin. By the time the car stopped in front of a townhouse in Gramercy Park, she'd convinced herself she was overthinking everything. Maybe this was just how people like Theo operated. Sleek cars, subtle gestures, controlled elegance. But stepping inside the townhouse wiped all thoughts away. It wasn't a restaurant. It was someone's home, Theo's. "Welcome," he said softly from the foyer, his sleeves rolled and collar open, like he'd just tossed off a boardroom and stepped into something real. "I thought we could cook tonight." She blinked. "You cook?" "I try," he said, motioning her forward. "I figured it might be easier to talk without a waiter hovering every 3 minutes." The kitchen was warm, flooded with soft light from pendant fixtures above a marble island. He'd laid out ingredients: fresh herbs, pasta, a bottle of red wine already breathing. "I'm not great with knives," she warned, slipping off her coat. "I'll handle the chopping. You stir." By the time the pasta was boiling and the garlic sizzling in butter, the air between them had shifted. Less anticipation, more ease. He handed her a glass of wine and leaned against the counter, watching her with a look that made her pulse trip over itself. "You said your father was a contractor," he said, swirling his glass. "Still is. He used to take me to job sites when I was little. Said I had an eye for space before I could spell blueprints." Theo nodded. "That explains your confidence in the meeting." "I wasn't confident," she said, laughing. "I was terrified. You didn't show it." She stirred the sauce, then glanced at him. "What about you?" "Always knew you wanted to run an empire." He paused, then shook his head. "I wanted to build things, real things, but I got swept into the family business. My father passed before I had the chance to do anything else." There was a flicker in his expression, something heavier than he let on. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "It was a long time ago, but sometimes I wonder what I'd be doing if I hadn't inherited the company. Maybe I'd be the one designing lobbies instead of hiring people to do it." She smiled. "I doubt you'd be happy with a cubicle and budget constraints." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but I do envy the clarity of it. You create something, you finish it, you can see it, touch it." He fell silent for a moment, watching the sauce bubble. Then, most days, I'm just putting out fires. Legal issues, board politics, press strategy, there's no end. No satisfaction. Riley looked at him differently then, not as the man who owned the skyline, but as someone still searching for meaning inside all of it. After dinner, they didn't move from the kitchen. He poured more wine and she leaned against the island, their hands brushing now and then, neither pulling away. "You're not what I expected," he said suddenly. "Because I don't wear designer heels or drop contracts into conversations. Because you don't want anything from me," she tilted her head. "Should I?" He stepped closer, his voice low. "No. That's what I like about you." He kissed her then, slow, deliberate, like he'd been holding back every second since they met. Her breath caught, but she didn't hesitate. His hands slid to her waist and the rest of the world dropped out. When she pulled away, her head was spinning. "I should go," she whispered. He nodded, but didn't move. "Will you come back?" She hesitated, then reached up and brushed her fingers lightly over his jaw. "If you keep cooking like that, I might not have a choice." He smiled, not the polished, press-ready kind, but something quiet. Something just for her. The ride home felt different. The streetlights blurred past and she leaned back against the headrest, her fingers still tingling where they'd touched him. The next morning, her phone buzzed with a calendar invite. A second design review for Carrington Holdings. But this time, it wasn't in the corporate office location. Private residence. Upper East Side. She stared at the address. It wasn't Theo's townhouse. She arrived that evening to find a penthouse that could have doubled as a luxury hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a terrace that overlooked the park, and a staff that greeted her by name before disappearing into silence. Theo met her in the hallway, wearing a navy shirt and no tie. "Come. I want to show you something." They walked through a corridor that led to an unfinished section of the property. Exposed beams, sample materials pinned to boards, floor plans spread out on a sleek drafting table. "I bought this place to renovate," he said, "but I've been stuck." "Nothing feels right." She scanned the layout. "You're trying to make it look like a hotel suite." "Because that's what I know," he admitted, "but it doesn't feel like home." Riley stepped closer to the plans, studying the angles, the flow of space. Her fingers traced the lines. "You're focusing on symmetry, but what if you thought about warmth? Places to breathe, corners that invite you to stay." He watched her, something shifting in his eyes. "I want you to design it," he said. She straightened. "What? Not your firm." That's not Theo, that's not how this works. We'd have to submit through I already cleared it with the board. It's my personal property. My decision." She opened her mouth, closed it again. "Why?" "Because I trust you," he said simply. "And I want to build something real. With someone who doesn't care what my last name is." Her throat tightened. The offer wasn't just professional, it was something more, a door opening. She looked at the plans again, then at him. "Okay," she said. "Let's build it." As she stood there, surrounded by raw space and possibility, she didn't realize yet that the foundation they'd just laid together wasn't just for a home. It was for everything coming next. The air was crisp the morning Riley arrived at the Carrington penthouse, with her design drafts tucked under her arm. The doorman greeted her by name again, but this time, she didn't flinch. She'd spent the past 5 days immersed in concepts, sketching out structural adjustments, studying ambient light patterns, and drafting what she hoped Theo would see as a space that felt lived and not curated. When he opened the door, he was barefoot, reading glasses pushed to the top of his head and a mug in his hand. The image disarmed her. "I made coffee," he said, stepping back to let her inside. "Unless you're one of those people who can survive on air and ambition." "I'm not," she said, handing him a folder, "but I brought you something better." He led her into the living space, bare walls now lined with material samples and lighting options. She laid out her sketches on the table between them. Theo flipped to the first page, scanning silently, his brow furrowed as he took it in. "You shifted the kitchen," he said. "It was facing the wrong direction. It blocked light and you had no line of sight to the terrace. I reoriented it, added a breakfast nook here." She tapped the corner so it feels more grounded. "Less showroom." He turned another page. This wall's gone. You never used that guest room. I opened it into a library, built-in shelves, soft lighting, a reading lounge. You've got the space. Use it. He looked up. You make it sound like you know how I live. I've been paying attention. He studied her a moment longer, something unreadable in his expression. Then he leaned back in his chair, the folder still open in his lap. I want you to oversee the build. She shook her head. Theo, I'm not asking, he said. You see things other people don't. You're not designing for a client. You're designing for a person. That's rare. She hesitated. What if it doesn't work? Then we'll tear it down and try again. She laughed softly, but inside something shifted. Trust. Not just in her work, in her. The renovation began 2 weeks later. Riley was on site daily, coordinating contractors, reviewing samples, and adjusting measurements as the vision came to life. Theo dropped in more often than he needed to, sometimes in a suit between meetings, other times in jeans with sleeves rolled up, offering opinions on tile textures and lighting fixtures. One afternoon, as she reviewed the custom cabinetry specs, she noticed him lingering in the doorway, arms crossed. Something wrong with the color? She asked. No, he said. It's just, you look like you belong here. She didn't know what to say to that, so she turned back to the blueprint, but he stepped closer. I'm not just talking about the apartment, he said quietly. I know. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was weighted. Real. Later that evening, he took her to a benefit gala at the Metropolitan Club. She hadn't planned on going, but he'd asked her with such quiet certainty that she'd found herself saying yes before she could think of a reason not to. The driver dropped them off at the arched entrance, chandeliers glowing behind the tall windows. Theo offered his arm and she took it, her heels clicking against the marble as they entered. Inside, the crowd was dressed to impress. Diamonds gleamed, laughter echoed, and servers floated past with champagne flutes on silver trays. Theo greeted people with that effortless command. She was starting to recognize a nod here, a handshake there, but he never let go of her hand. Is every night like this for you? She asked under her breath. God, I hope not, he replied. But tonight I wanted you here. They danced once. Slowly, deliberately. She wasn't even sure what the music was. All she could feel was the press of his hand at her back and the way his eyes never left hers. But the night turned when a woman approached them near the bar. Elegant. Blonde. Wearing a dress that looked like something designed for a runway, not a fundraiser. Theo, she said, placing a manicured hand on his arm. I didn't know you were back in town. I'm here for the foundation, he said smoothly. Tessa, this is Riley Lawson. The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. And what do you do, Miss Lawson? Before Riley could answer, Theo stepped in. She's designing my home. Tessa's brows lifted. Oh, interior design, architecture, Riley said evenly, but the lines blur sometimes. Theo's grip on her waist tightened just slightly. Excuse us. He led her away, but not before Riley caught the look Tessa gave her. Pity maybe, or judgment. It clung to her like static. On the drive home, the tension sat between them like fog. Who was she? Riley finally asked. An old tie. Nothing that matters anymore. She didn't seem to think so. She thinks a lot of things, he said. None of them affect how I feel about you. She turned to him. And how do you feel about me? The car slowed as they neared her apartment. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached across the seat, taking her hand. I feel like I'm finally breathing again. Her throat tightened. The car stopped. He walked her to her door but didn't kiss her. Instead, he touched her cheek with the back of his hand. I don't want to lose this because of noise from my past, he said. Then don't let it in. He nodded once, then turned and walked back down the steps. Inside, Riley leaned against the door, her heart thudding like it was trying to break free from her chest. She wasn't the girl who went to rooftop parties. She wasn't the girl who got swept up by billionaires. But with Theo, it didn't feel like being swept up. It felt like being chosen. The final inspection of the penthouse was scheduled for Thursday at 4. Riley had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with final fixture placements, window treatments, and the delicate balance between intimacy and elegance that she'd fought to maintain through every square foot of the space. She arrived early, her boots silent on the polished wood as she moved through the completed rooms one final time. The terrace doors had been installed the previous week, folding open to reveal the full sweep of the skyline. The garden boxes she'd designed for the east corner had already started to bloom with lavender and rosemary. The scent drifted into the open-plan lounge, mixing with the faint aroma of cedar from the reclaimed beams overhead. She ran her fingers along the stone of the fireplace, then crossed into the library. The shelves were still mostly empty, save for a few hardcovers she'd tucked there the day before one of them, a worn architectural digest her father had given her years ago. She was standing in the sunlit dining nook, the one she'd fought to keep when the contractor suggested expanding the kitchen, when she heard his voice behind her. "You did it." Theo stood in the doorway, jacket slung over one shoulder, eyes on her like he was seeing her for the first time all over again. "I didn't do it alone," Riley said, her voice quieter than she expected. "You trusted me to make it yours." He stepped in slowly, his gaze moving over the space, lingering on the hand-finished table, the pendant lights she'd imported from Portugal, the curve of the plaster arch she'd insisted on even when everyone said it was impractical. "It doesn't feel like a Carrington property," he said. "It feels like home." She turned toward him. That was the point. For a moment neither of them spoke. The city hummed faintly beyond the glass, but inside it was still. Theo set his jacket down and crossed the room toward her. "I've been thinking about what you said that night after the gala." She looked up at him, uncertain. "Which part?" "That I shouldn't let the noise in." He paused. "I didn't realize until then how much of my life was being lived for other people, for shareholders, for legacy. Even for ghosts." She searched his face, the tension in his brow, the way his hands didn't quite settle. "I'm not a clean slate," he said. "You know that. I've made choices, some for the company, some out of fear. But I don't want fear running my life anymore." "What do you want instead?" "You." The words settled between them like a stone dropped into still water. "I want to build something that isn't just walls and rooms and deals," he continued. "I want mornings with coffee that you make too strong. I want fights about throw pillow patterns and stolen covers. I want to come home to you." Riley's mouth parted, but nothing came out. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You came into my life like a thunderstorm. I wasn't planning for it. I wasn't ready. But now I can't imagine a version of it without you in it." Her breath caught in her throat. "Theo." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. No flourish, no theatrics. "I know it's fast, I know it's insane. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, stunning, a single oval diamond set in a slender platinum band. No halo, no glitter, just precision and clarity. "Marry me, Riley Lawson." Her knees almost gave out. "I don't need a ceremony tomorrow or a headline. I just need you to say yes to building a life, a real one." She couldn't speak for a long moment. Then she looked around the room, the one she'd poured her soul into, and realized it wasn't just her design that had transformed it, it was everything they'd become while building it. She looked back at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." He didn't ask again. He simply stepped forward, slid the ring onto her finger, and kissed her like the world had finally settled into place. Later, they sat on the terrace, backs against the brick wall, her head on his shoulder and the city ablaze beneath them. "You still think I don't want anything from you?" she asked. He turned his head slightly. "Do you?" "Just this," she said. "Just you, without the headlines, without the name. Just the man who listened to me talk about light flow and breakfast nooks like it mattered." "Because it does matter," he said. "Because you do." She adjusted slightly to look at him. "How did we get here?" He kissed her temple. "You showed up to a rooftop party," she laughed softly. "I almost didn't go. I've never been so glad someone changed their mind." The stars blinked faintly above the skyline, and somewhere below, the city kept moving. But up here, In a penthouse that no longer felt like a fortress but a promise, Riley Lawson leaned into the man who'd appended everything she thought she knew about power and love. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was visiting someone else's world. She felt like she was home. The first time Riley signed her name as Riley Lawson Carrington, it was on a structural permit for a coastal retreat project in Nantucket, a property Theo had quietly purchased months before he proposed, but hadn't mentioned until after she said yes. "I wasn't sure what we'd need it for," he'd said, "but I knew I wanted to build something with you that didn't touch the skyline." It wasn't just a house, it was a collaboration, a blending of their visions. He handled the land acquisition and logistics, while she designed every inch from the layout of the breezy open rooms to the quiet study tucked behind sliding barn doors. They spent weekends flying out to the site, their hands dusty with samples and sketches, arguing over whether the deck should wrap around the west side or stop at the kitchen, laughing when they realized they were both wrong and neither cared. They married in late spring in the garden behind Theo's Gramercy townhouse under strung lights and blooming dogwood trees. 70 guests, no press, no corporate sponsors, no one from the board. Kayla officiated, holding back tears as she read from a letter Riley had written years ago during architecture school about building foundations that could weather storms. Theo wore a navy suit, no tie, his cufflinks a gift from Riley made of reclaimed wood from the penthouse renovation. When he said, "I do," he didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who'd finally found the one place he didn't need to prove anything. After the reception, they didn't disappear to a far-off island or a castle in France. Instead, they went back to the penthouse, the one she'd designed. The one they'd built. She kicked off her heels in the entryway and turned to him. "This feels like the first time we walked in here." "I remember," he said. "You stood right there, hair pulled back, completely unaware you were about to change my life." They didn't rush to unpack the wedding gifts. They didn't post anything. They lay on the floor of their sunlit library, surrounded by books, the windows cracked open to let the breeze in, and talked about what came next. Theo leaned against the shelves, one arm behind his head. "I've been thinking about stepping back." She sat up. "From the company, not completely, but I want to create something smaller, more personal. Real estate that doesn't just profit but transforms neighborhoods, schools, clinics, housing that's actually lived in." Her eyebrows lifted. "You're talking about community development, partnerships. With people who know what they're doing, like you. You want me to design them? I want you to lead them." She stared at him, stunned. "Theo, I'm not doing it for you," he said. "I'm doing it because I see what you see now. That power means nothing if it doesn't serve something bigger." She stood slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at the city that had always felt like it belonged to someone else. "I used to think I'd always be on the outside of this world," she said, "trying to prove myself. Trying to earn space." "You never needed to earn it," he replied. "You were always the one shaping it." They launched the foundation 4 months later, Carrington Lawson Initiatives. The first project broke ground in Brooklyn, an after-school center with rooftop gardens and an art wing Riley had fought to keep in the budget. She walked the site in boots and a hard hat, reviewing progress as Theo stood off to the side, quietly watching her lead. Their life didn't become a fairy tale, it became something better. Real. Some days he came home late, shoulders tense from meetings. Some days she buried herself in blueprints and forgot to eat lunch. But there was always dinner together, even if it was takeout. Always shared coffee in the mornings, even if it was rushed. Always notes tucked into briefcases. Always hands reaching for each other in the dark. One evening, nearly a year after the wedding, they stood on the terrace of the Nantucket retreat. The waves whispered below and the house behind them glowed with warm light. Riley leaned into him, her head on his chest. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "The rooftop," she nodded. "If I hadn't gone, if you hadn't said anything, I would have found you, Riley. Even if it took years." She turned to face him. "You can't know that." "I do," he said. Because I wasn't looking for someone to fit into my life, I was waiting for the person who would make me want to change it. She smiled, her fingers lacing through his. We built something, didn't we? We're just getting started. The stars blinked above them, and the sea stretched endless under the moonlight. Inside, the space they'd created together whispered with the quiet promise of what was still to come. And out there, beyond the cliffs and city lights, the world waited ready for whatever they chose to build next together.